Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now, sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. My name is Derek Callahan, and until recently, I worked as a ride operator at the Kings Island, a sprawling amusement park just outside Cincinnati, Ohio. It was the kind of job you take for the summer and stay longer than you mean to. I started when I was 20, still living at home and unsure what I wanted to do. Somehow, I was still there at 28, slinging ride belts and making safety announcements over the intercom with a fake enthusiasm I'd long since run out of. If you've never been to Kings Island, let me paint the scene. 364 acres of screams, overpriced food, and roller coasters that look like they might fly into orbit if a bolt came loose. On a typical summer day, the place pulls in over 20,000 visitors, not including staff. There's the Beast, the world's longest wooden roller coaster. There's Orion, a giga coaster that drops you from 300 feet at nearly 92 miles per hour. And then there's Planet Snoopy for the kids, with Peanuts characters in costumes that always smelled faintly of sweat and plastic. I worked at Drop Tower, a 315-foot vertical freefall ride that takes your breath away before you can scream. It was a decent post. You weren't in the sun all day like the water ride guys, and the tower's platform gave you a good view of the whole park. The day it started was May 25th, a Saturday, Memorial Day weekend, the beginning of peak season. It was already hot by 9 a.m. and people were pouring in at the gates like a river breaking through a dam. I was halfway through my morning safety checks when my radio crackled. "Callahan, you there?" It was Julie Mendez, my supervisor. She was ex-Navy, walked like she still had steel in her boots, and could shut down a group of rowdy teenagers faster than park security. "Yeah, I'm at Drop Tower, just finished cables and brakes. We've got a guest collapse near Fest House. Med crew's already on site, but they're calling for backup. If it gets ugly, hold the tower, don't load." Fest House is a German-themed food court near the center of the park. Lots of sausages and Bavarian pretzels. It also tends to be the spot where heat exhaustion hits people who forgot water or had one too many beers at the beer garden. But this early in the day, that was odd. Copy that, I'll hold. 10 minutes passed, then 20. We weren't loading anyone. The queue started to back up with guests complaining about the wait. That's when I noticed the birds. It might sound strange, but the seagulls were acting weird. Kings Island is far from the coast, but you still get gulls scavenging for fries. They usually hovered over trash cans and picnic areas. That morning, they were circling high over the drop tower. Quiet, tight circles. Like they were watching for something. I even saw one land on the railing, cock its head at me and just stare. No squawk, no peck, just watching. The radio squawked again. "All right, operators, stand by. We have a temporary shutdown on Action Zone and Oktoberfest areas. Medical teams are relocating. Repeat, do not engage rides in those zones. Remain at your post. Dispatchers, lock ride panels." I'd never heard that tone before, not even during drills. Something was wrong. I stepped down from the tower and leaned over the railing to get a view past the trees toward the Oktoberfest section. There were people running, not fast, not panicked, just moving with strange jerky steps. Some were on all fours. One guy in a bright red shirt stumbled into the lake and didn't try to get out. He just stayed there, standing, waist deep in water, arms limp by his side. From behind, I heard someone gag. It was Kylie, the newest ride tech, still in high school. She'd come up behind me without a word and was pale as paper. "You okay?" I asked. She didn't answer, just pointed, down at the midway. There was a family, mom, dad, 2 kids. The father was crawling. His limbs bent the wrong way, twitching. He lunged toward a maintenance worker and grabbed his ankle. The worker fell hard. I saw blood, real blood. Not the Halloween haunt kind with tubes and sticky corn syrup. The man didn't move again after that. "What is this? Is this a prank?" Kylie whispered. If only. By 10:30 a.m., the PA system stuttered to life. "Attention all guests, due to unforeseen circumstances, Kings Island will be closing early today. Please proceed calmly to the nearest exit. Security will assist." The message repeated in Spanish and again in French. That was the moment the illusion cracked. Guests looked at one another. They pulled out phones. Some started running toward the exit, while others pushed in the opposite direction to see what was going on. Screams echoed from the Oktoberfest side. My radio crackled again. "All staff, proceed to emergency Rally Point Bravo. Secure rides, lock panels, and shut power. No exceptions. Avoid contact with aggressive individuals. Repeat, avoid contact." I didn't hesitate. Kylie was already halfway down the stairs. I hit the shutdown sequence, panel locked, magnet engaged, breakers off. Then I grabbed the emergency medkit from the supply box and sprinted after her. We ran past the Banshee coaster queue, which was empty. Abandoned bags and spilled sodas everywhere. The lockers had been ripped open. One of the Peanuts character suits was lying in the bushes with its head torn off. No person inside. We turned a corner toward the AE backstage path, a maintenance-only walkway that led to the warehouse where they stored ride parts. That was the location of Rally Point Bravo, or at least it used to be. What we saw as we turned the final corner stopped us both cold. There were bodies everywhere. Staff uniforms, khaki shorts, polos, maintenance gear. Someone was screaming inside the warehouse. Long, guttural wails. A figure was thrashing in the gravel, writhing like a fish pulled from water. Another one, a man in a food court apron, was pounding on the glass doors with bloodied hands. His face was contorted in a snarl. When his mouth opened, there were chunks of flesh stuck in his teeth. Kylie froze. "Oh, no. No, no." I grabbed her wrist and pulled her back the way we came. "We can't stay here," I shouted. "We'll go around, get to the employee lot." "The exit's locked during lockdown. We need clearance," she cried. I didn't have time to argue. We heard the warehouse doors burst open. Shouts, then shots. I looked back just once. Security had arrived, 3 officers. One of them had a Glock 19 standard issue for the private security team. He was firing at the warehouse doors, but whatever came out didn't slow down. We ducked through the lower maintenance hallway, a back path used to transport mascot costumes and first aid kits. It reeked of grease and bleach. I locked the door behind us and bolted it with a crowbar wedged into the frame. The emergency lighting cast everything in a dim red glow, turning what should have been a familiar staff hallway into something out of a bad dream. Kylie was still pressed against the soda crate, her breathing shallow, pupils wide. I crouched down next to her and did a quick mental checklist. She wasn't bleeding, no signs of bite marks or scratches, just in shock. I needed her alert, so I handed her one of the electrolyte gel packs from the medkit and ordered her to squeeze it down. She obeyed in silence, still trembling but functioning. This maintenance corridor ran underneath part of the Festhouse area and connected to the Central Operations Hub, a low, concrete building most guests never saw, where management, surveillance, and park security worked behind the scenes. If we could make it there, we might find real information, working radios, and maybe someone with enough clearance to open the service gates. The radio channels had gone quiet since the shooting started. Either the frequency was overwhelmed or whoever had been coordinating had gone down. I didn't want to consider which one it was. We moved quickly and silently. our footsteps muffled on the rubber matting. I kept the crowbar in hand, not because I thought it would do much against whatever those things were, but because it gave me a sense of control. I'd been working at Kings Island for nearly a decade. I'd seen power outages, weather evacuations, even one time when a guy tried to sneak a pet snake on a ride. But nothing prepared me for the horror of hearing my coworkers screaming through a wall, or watching a man with a twisted leg and no expression lurch toward another human like an animal sensing prey. We reached the end of the hallway and approached the heavy double doors that led into the utility tunnels beneath the Rivertown section. These tunnels were built decades ago for deliveries and utilities, water, power, and fiber optics. I'd only been down there twice during my entire tenure, and both times under supervision. Most staff didn't even know they existed. I didn't like the idea of heading underground when things were going crazy above, but we had no choice. The midway was no longer safe, and the utility tunnel would bring us out just behind the admin offices near the International Street fountain. I pushed the door open slowly. The hinge gave a low metallic groan. The tunnel beyond was cooler, and the air smelled stale, like copper and mildew. Rows of pipes lined the walls, each marked with white stenciled symbols. Water main, electrical fire line. There were utility boxes every 50 feet and battery-powered LED lamps on the walls, dimly flickering. The passage curved out of sight, and I hoped nothing was waiting beyond it. We kept going, moving faster now, the sounds of chaos above us muffled by concrete and distance. Occasionally, the thud of running footsteps echoed faintly through vents in the ceiling, but it was impossible to tell who or what was making them. I tried to keep my thoughts focused, pushing back memories of the man dragging himself across the gravel by his chin, or the crowd by the warehouse doors, tearing through bodies like meat at a butcher shop. It was about a 5-minute walk to the admin access hatch, assuming no detours. Around the halfway point, we came across a set of breaker panels labeled Power Substation C. The door was ajar. There was blood on the handle. I stopped, grabbed Kylie's shoulder and motioned for silence. We listened. Nothing. I didn't want to open the door. I didn't need to. We kept moving. About 40 yards further, the tunnel widened into a small junction. From there, a ladder led up to a service hatch. This one would put us right behind the Kings Island Theater adjacent to the guest services office. The plan was to get into the staff admin building, find Julie or someone from Central Ops, and figure out what the hell was going on, assuming any of them were still alive. I climbed the ladder first and tested the hatch. It opened an inch with some resistance. I peered through. The lot was a mess. Vans had crashed into one another, some of them smoking. The window of the HR office was shattered. One of the Kings Island branded golf carts had flipped onto its side. No movement. No noise. I pushed the hatch open fully and climbed out, reaching back to help Kylie. We moved between the parked maintenance vehicles and toward the nearest door. I used my badge to open it. Thankfully, power was still flowing to this part of the system, and we slipped inside. The hallway smelled like printer toner and burnt coffee. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered weakly. The admin area was eerily silent. I led us toward the surveillance room, hoping someone had locked in there. As we passed the staff kitchen, a low moan stopped us both. We backed against the wall and peeked around the corner. Gary, one of the security techs, was slumped in a chair by the vending machines. His foot was twisted underneath the leg, bone pushing against skin. His chest rose and fell, but something was wrong. His eyes were milky, glazed, not blinking. Blood had pooled beneath him, but he wasn't reacting to us. Then he twitched. His head turned a fraction of an inch, slowly. We backed up fast, ducking into the next hallway. I didn't know how long someone could survive like that, Whatever was happening, it wasn't normal. Not a disease, not a breakdown. The surveillance room was locked, but I still had the master staff keycard. I swiped it. The green light blinked. The door unlocked with a click, and I shoved it open. Inside were 5 monitors, all still displaying live feeds from the park. One of the chairs was toppled. There was a half-eaten protein bar on the floor, torn open. No one was here. I pulled up the camera bank and cycled through. What I saw confirmed my worst fears. On the monitor labeled Action Zone. Dozens of people, staff and guests alike, were dragging themselves across the concrete, covered in blood. Some were twitching on the ground, others were eating. The camera's angle showed a clear view of the Banshee coaster platform. Its normally pristine queue fences now twisted or broken, with turnstiles jammed sideways as if people had burst through them all at once. The support staff were gone. The platform looked like the aftermath of a massacre. One of the coaster cars sat in place, half-loaded. Its restraints were still locked, and inside the front row sat a young woman slumped forward. Her head was tilted at an impossible angle, hanging by what looked like a single strip of muscle and sinew. She didn't move. Kylie turned away from the monitor, breathing heavy, her eyes glassy. She was past fear now and squarely in shock, but I didn't have time to nurse anyone through the stages of grief. We were running out of options. Outside, the outbreak had clearly accelerated. Whatever Quarantine Mason Fire Department claimed they'd established was either too late or only kept more from getting in, not the things already inside from getting out. Judging by the smoke billowing across the Soak City Cam and the bright orange glow near Diamondback, the fires were spreading. I had worked fire drills before. I knew what contained burns looked like. These weren't controlled. These were chaotic, uncontrolled infernos, spread by panicked people, torn electrical lines, ruptured propane grills, or worse. I took a quick inventory of the surveillance room. Besides the monitors and the repeater unit, we had 2 radios, one of which was no longer responding on any channel. The emergency key box had been forced open. Every emergency door override key had been taken. No firearms. Security at Kings Island wasn't armed like law enforcement. They carried tasers and batons. It hadn't been enough. The only real asset we had was information. The cameras covered nearly the entire park. If there were any other survivors, we might be able to locate them. I cycled through the East Perimeter cams, First International Street Planet Snoopy main entrance and guest services. No major movement. Just scattered debris and toppled signs. On the main entrance feed, the gates were sealed, as promised. I could see 2 fire trucks parked across the entry plaza, manned by figures in turnout gear standing behind makeshift barriers. I saw at least 1 squad car with Hamilton County Sheriff's Office markings. Outside, the gates were people, survivors, pressing against the bars, trying to wave down the responders. But none of the emergency crew moved. They held their positions. I couldn't hear sound, but I could see it in their posture. Refusal. No one was getting out. I turned next to the back-of-house camera bank, focusing on service roads and utility access points. That's when I saw someone running, sprinting, down the old access road near the Kings Island campground entrance, weaving between dumpsters. He was alone, wearing a green jacket and carrying something long and metallic. A pipe or crowbar, maybe. He slipped and fell behind a storage shed, then crawled to his feet and ducked into a maintenance doorway. On the patch on his sleeve, I made out a logo. Ride Maintenance Crew. Someone else was alive. I switched to nearby feeds and began scanning the Beast Maintenance Facility, a structure hidden deep within the wooded section of the park's western boundary. Most guests never knew it existed. It was where the maintenance crew stored track parts and did overnight inspections on the legendary wooden coaster. The place had thick walls and 2 entrances, one staff door in front and a rear garage bay connected to a gravel path that looped out toward the campground service road. As I scrolled through the feeds, another figure appeared on camera, this one inside the maintenance bay. He was older, with a shaved head and stained safety vest. He was boarding up the inside of the garage door using tools scavenged from an overturned supply cart. A familiar face. His name was Frank Moreno, a senior maintenance foreman. Had to be pushing 60, but he'd been with the park since the early 90s and was one of the most capable men I knew. If he was alive and sheltering there, maybe others were with him. I turned to Kylie. "There's a secure site at the maintenance bay behind the beast," I told her. "It's far from the crowd zones and deep in the woods. One of our crew just took shelter there. If we can reach it, we might stand a chance." She nodded faintly. "How far?" "Half a mile, maybe more on foot. Through unlit zones. We'll have to stay off the main paths." We raided the emergency supply closet in the admin lounge and packed what we could. Water bottles, granola bars, a backup 2-way radio with fresh batteries, and a handful of LED glow sticks. No weapons, but I kept the crowbar. I also grabbed a portable fire extinguisher. It wasn't lethal, but it might buy us seconds if we were cornered. Before we left, I took one last look at the monitors. On the Rivertown Plaza cam, the crowd had grown. Not guests, them dozens of infected had drifted toward the central section of the park. They weren't running now. Most of them moved slowly, heads tilted as if listening for something just out of reach. They were hunting by sound or motion, not vision. That was our advantage. We left through the loading dock exit and cut through the admin parking lot. The air was thick with the smell of burnt plastic and grease. In the distance, an explosion rolled across the air like thunder. Something had ignited the gas lines near the Coney Mall food court. I didn't turn around to check. We moved low and quick along the outer fence line, slipping past a smashed merch booth and a row of crushed recycling bins. Kylie kept pace, quiet now, focused. The fear hadn't left her, but it had hardened into survival. Good, I needed someone thinking clearly. When we reached the Rivertown service trail, we paused beneath an old pine tree near the Mystic Timbers Ride photo building. The path to the beast maintenance shed was barely visible in the dying light, and the park's emergency backup power had finally cut out. Everything went dark except for the low flicker of fires in the distance. We moved under the cover of trees, the only sound our footsteps and the rustling leaves. About halfway to our destination, we heard the moan. It came from the trees to the right, deep and low, like someone exhaling through cracked ribs. We froze. In the shadows, I saw the shape of a figure, arms crooked, one leg dragging, head jerking in small, unnatural spasms. Its face was sunken, eyes pale. It was dressed in a Kings Island ride attendant shirt, name tag still on. Tyler. He'd worked Soak City. He'd been at the staff cookout the weekend before. He stumbled forward, arms twitching. I held my breath and motioned for Kylie to stop moving. Tyler sniffed the air. Literally. His head twitched left, then right, and then... He walked past us. Less than 15 feet away. Didn't react, just wandered off through the underbrush. I waited a full minute before I exhaled. He hadn't seen us. Maybe they truly were hunting by sound or vibration. We made the final approach to the maintenance building and saw the service door propped open with a concrete block. I tapped twice, then again in a pattern. I didn't know if Frank would remember it. It was an old maintenance crew knock we used during a haunt season when walking the coasters at night. A second later, a flashlight clicked on from behind the door, and Frank's voice came through. "Derek, that you?" "Yes, and Kylie, we're clean." The door opened wider. Frank's face was pale, lined with sweat, but he looked alive and alert. Inside the bay were 3 others. Dante, a ride mechanic from Banshee. Lynn, a nurse from the first aid station. And Mason, a security dispatcher with blood on his pants but no visible injuries. The place had been converted hastily into a makeshift shelter. Food crates had been stacked against windows, and workbenches had been pushed to block doors. A battery-powered radio played static in the corner. Frank closed the door behind us and locked it. "You picked the right direction," he said. "The whole north side's gone. We watched the Eiffel Tower collapse an hour ago. Fire took the base." I stared at him. "Collapse? What do you mean?" "Too many people tried to climb it to escape. Someone set off an explosion at the base. Might have been the propane from the grill court. Doesn't matter, it's gone. Took out half of International Street with it." I didn't respond. I couldn't. The Eiffel Tower replica had been the centerpiece of Kings Island since 1972. Nearly 315 feet of structural steel that anchored the park visually and emotionally. I'd stood beneath it during 4th of July fireworks, Halloween haunt send-offs, and opening day countdowns. It had always felt permanent. Now it was reduced to twisted wreckage and rubble, and so many people had died under it that the details barely mattered anymore. Frank rubbed the back of his neck and motioned for us to sit. "We've got maybe 6 or 8 hours before sunrise. We can't stay here. The sound of the explosion's gonna draw more of those things, even out here in the woods." Mason, the dispatcher, sat on an overturned bucket near the back, eyes closed, arms crossed over his chest like he was forcing himself not to shake. The blood on his pants was dark and dried, crusted along the edge of a torn cargo pocket. Lynn, the nurse, had tried to bandage the injury, but it was clear he'd been bitten, not deeply, but enough. The bite was old, a couple of hours at least. He hadn't turned, not yet, but the way Frank kept glancing at him told me that none of us expected him to stay stable much longer. I pulled out the map someone had sketched on a ride inspection clipboard. It was rough but functional, showing the full layout of Kings Island and the adjacent campground area. Behind the maintenance shop, a gravel road stretched westward through the woods, eventually crossing under Interstate 71 and reaching a series of service buildings that connected with the campground staff housing units. If any place had a chance of being secure, it was there. Not because of defenses, because of isolation. "Assuming we take this route," I said, tracing the path with my finger, "we can reach the back entrance by sunrise. Maybe sooner if we move quickly." Frank nodded. "We've got the keys to the service cart," he said, motioning to a battered golf cart parked by the compressor tanks. "But she's only got about 30% battery left. Might carry 2, maybe 3 people. The rest will have to walk." Dante was already loading it with a small generator, 3 flashlights, and a cooler of bottled water. He'd been silent since we arrived, but efficient. Focused. I remembered him from my early days. He used to be a seasonal tech before going full-time on the coaster crew. No drama, just got the job done. We made the plan quickly. Kylie and I would walk, leading the group along the gravel path. Frank would drive the cart slowly, with Mason riding in the back, partially because he couldn't walk well, but mostly so we could keep an eye on him. Lynn and Dante would bring up the rear on foot. Everyone would carry what they could. No yelling, no lights unless necessary. If we saw more than 5 of those things at once, we'd scatter into the woods and regroup after 10 minutes. Simple rules, brutal but effective. At 3:17 a.m., we cracked the garage bay just enough to slip out into the night. The woods behind the beast were dense and thick with the kind of silence that presses into your ears. Every crunch of gravel under our boots sounded like a gunshot. I carried the crowbar still, but in the quiet, it felt useless. like trying to fight a forest fire with a bucket of water. Still, I gripped it tight. We made it 100 yards without incident. The only movement came from the wind rustling the treetops. I glanced up and saw stars, clear, sharp, endless. The kind of sky I never noticed during fireworks shows or summer events. It felt like an entirely different world above us, watching and indifferent. Half a mile in, the trees opened up to a narrow clearing. An abandoned tram rail stretched alongside the trail, rusted and warped, one of the old transport systems retired years ago. That's when we heard the scream. It wasn't loud, it wasn't close, but it was human. A woman, young, desperate, coming from somewhere northeast, maybe by the old Whitewater Canyon spill-off. Kylie turned to me, face frozen. Frank pulled the cart to a stop. "We don't have time," he said, already knowing we'd argue. "We can't just leave someone screaming out there," Kylie said. "Unless you want to split up," I added. "We either go as a group or we don't go at all. If she's out there, we've got maybe 2 minutes to get to her." Frank let out a frustrated sigh and killed the cart's engine. "Then make it fast." Kylie and I broke off, following the faint echo. The terrain dropped into a shallow ditch lined with overgrown shrubs and broken fencing. We found her 10 yards in. A teenager, maybe 17, wearing a Soak City staff hoodie and jeans soaked in mud. Her name tag read Maria. She was hiding beneath a toppled souvenir kiosk, arms covering her head, knees scraped and bleeding. When she saw us, she tried to crawl backward, terrified. "We're staff," I said quickly. "We're clean. We're getting out of here." She hesitated, then crawled out. "They were everywhere," she whispered, shaking. "They came through the slides, out of the lazy river. I saw them rip apart the manager at the lockers. He tried to pull the emergency alarm." "We have to go," I said, grabbing her arm and leading her back towards the trail. "There's no time." By the time we got back, the group had already resumed moving. Frank waved us over, and we fell in line again. Maria kept close to Kylie, her whole body trembling. She hadn't stopped crying, but at least she wasn't screaming. We reached the halfway point at a chain-link gate separating the park grounds from the campground utility corridor. The gate was locked, but Frank cut through the bolt with a salvaged angle grinder powered by the generator. The sound echoed like thunder, but it only lasted 20 seconds. We slipped through one at a time, and the gate clanged shut behind us. From there, it was a straight shot to the staff housing zone. The first building, an equipment shed, was dark but intact. We found fresh tire tracks leading to the back, where a maintenance pickup truck was parked, engine cold. Inside the building, we found canned food, unopened medical supplies, and two-way radios with a full charge. Better yet, the power grid was still active, low voltage, but enough to run light and water. By 5 a.m., we had secured the building. We barricaded windows, reinforced the doors with lockers, and set up a rotating watch. Lynn checked Mason again. His skin had gone cold, and his breathing slowed to irregular gasps. She told us not to get close. "If he goes," she whispered, "he'll go fast." At 6:15 a.m., the first light began to edge over the trees. Sunrise. I climbed to the roof with Dante and Frank, binoculars in hand. Smoke rose from a dozen different places: International Street, the front gates, the back of Flight of Fear, and somewhere near the parking lot. We could see movement too. Tiny figures staggering between burned buildings and collapsed rides. Nothing alive, at least not alive in any meaningful way. A single siren wailed in the distance, then another, farther off. For the first time, we saw helicopters. Not rescue birds, military, Blackhawks circling slowly, surveying. No landings, no drops, just eyes in the sky. "They're watching," Frank muttered. "They knew what was coming," I said quietly. He didn't disagree. Behind us, inside the shelter, Maria had finally stopped crying. Kylie sat with her, holding her hand. Lynn had pulled a sheet over Mason's body. We were all exhausted. We were all changed, but we were still alive. And as the sun lifted higher, casting the park in morning light for the first time since the nightmare began, we saw it clearly. Kings Island was gone. Not just the rides, or the buildings, or the Midway games. The innocence, the joy, the sense of safety, all gone. But we were still here, and we were going to survive. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.